Good evening, everyone. I'm going to do that. You should hopefully have full screen. If anyone hasn't, can they wave their arms frantically in the air? Thank you. So in Japanese, one would say konnichiwa, which is sort of good late afternoon. And for the evening, one would say konobanwa. So I'm not sure whether it's afternoon or evening now. But I'm going to hopefully move on. And I'm going to give a short story about my family's history in China, and then my travels in Japan, and then look at a very personal look at some of the favorite things I've learned and admire about Japan, its art, culture, traditions, and people. I think I visited Japan about 10 times, but I haven't counted them up. And I very much enjoy visiting Japan. And I thought, first of all, I'd say a bit about myself, because I have quite a strong family history related to Japan. And the first time, as an IVF specialist, I like to think the first time I was in Japan, I was an embryo, because, and that's an IVF embryo at about day 3 or 4, 2 or 3 or 4, because I was a honeymoon baby conceived in Yokohama, probably actually Miyanoshita, which you'll see later on. Because my parents were working in China at the time. My American Presbyterian missionary family had been in China for many years. And my English father went to China working for a big company. So I was born in Peking in 1940, rather a grumpy looking me there, and a rather hopefully less grumpy looking me there. But I like to think I was made in Japan, almost certainly. And as I say, I've traveled quite extensively in Japan, and as an art enthusiast, as it were, and a cult enthusiast about other cultures, I've studied quite a lot. And I've got various guidebooks that I've used over the years when I've been doing my researches. And I'll show you a few other books as I go along. So you can see I've traveled from Hokkaido in the very far north down through all these red circled areas, down through to the very south in Kyushu, which is the difference between the north and the south is quite remarkable. And every place has its own unique features. My last trip there was as a tour leader for an obstetrics and gynecology fertility group 2-3 years ago, which was very enjoyable. You'll see some slides of that later on. But first, I want to just look at my family in Japan. It's my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, and my mother's brother, my uncle, a rather fine name, Mortimer Claggett Cook. And Mortimer Cook the first was a Japanese, knew the Japanese language and so on, and joined Douglas MacArthur's staff in World War II. I don't think he's in this picture, but you'll see him again in a minute. And this is Douglas MacArthur here signing the surrender on USS Missouri in 1945. And my grandfather, who is this one here, still in uniform, met Emperor Hirohito here and his wife, Empress Kojun, which is a rare honor in those days. The emperor tended to stay closeted in his retreat in Tokyo, but and he was awarded a couple of years later a medal by the emperor and empress, this beautiful medal, which I have here, because he became head of the Red Cross in Japan, trying to build up Japan from the health and welfare point of view post-war. And Japan was the most awful mess after the war, as you can imagine, as was places like London, but Japan in particular, especially like places like Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is my grandfather here with Prince Chichubu, who was one of the major princes there, my uncle there, at his house in on the bluffs in Yokohama. They traveled extensively, and this is my uncle here with Mount Fuji in the background. And my grandfather used to frequent this very famous hotel, the Hotel New Grand in Yokohama, and it became a sort of headquarters in Yokohama for the American military. And he had a regular tab there at the bar, and he drank martinis there. And at his funeral, the barman placed a martini on his grave. He became very well known in Yokohama. And that's at his funeral. And you see the Red Cross here wreath from the Red Cross, quite extensive. And my uncle there in Gaijin Bochi, which is the sort of foreigner's graveyard in Yokohama, which I visited a few years ago. It is a very moving place because every burial there is a foreigner who died in Japan. It's a bit overgrown now, but it's very silent and peaceful and quiet compared to the bustle of Yokohama. And a very good friend of mine, a professor in IVF as well, Takumi Yanahara, who I've known for about 30 years now, helped me find my family grave there with my grandfather and my uncle there, and a nice Japanese dinner afterwards. There's nothing quite like good Japanese meal. The only drawback is you're sitting on the tatami, on the mat usually, cross-legged, and it's a job to get up, especially at my age afterwards. But I love the Japanese food. So having just given a brief outline of my family there, which went back quite a few years, this is taken from Dolan Kindersley's Eyewitness. I'm very fond of these books when I travel because they're very pictorial. I'm not trying to sell them, by the way. And I just take a quote from there. Few people in the modern world are not affected in some way by the ideas, culture, and economy of Japan, yet this country remains to many an enigma, an unsolved riddle, westernized but different from any Western country, any part of Asia, but clearly unlike any other Asian society. Japan is a uniquely adaptable place where, and I emphasize the word uniquely adaptable place, where tradition and modernity are part of one continuum. So they are very much one thing, very modern and very traditional at the same time, as you will see as we go along. So what do people think about when they think about Japan? They think about its long history, its traditions, its culture, some of the dramatic buildings, both very ancient and modern, their beautiful, beautiful gardens, art, samurai. One thinks also of the horrors and terrors of World War II, which I'm not going to dwell on now. The religions that are there, Shinto, Buddhism, Bushido, and the Bushido shows courtesy, respect, politeness, and the Japanese are well known for their efficiency and their modern technologies. So we'll meet some of these as we go along. The Way of the Warrior is a moral code concerning samurai, but it still lives today and is similar to the European concept of chivalry and is still present in society. And many Japanese consider it to be an important part of their culture. And this was used or abused in World War II, where it was presented death as a duty and a purifying thing. And it revitalized traditional values and promoted a spiritual shield. And the soldiers believed that they should die, and it was an honor to die to the bitter end, as so many of us will know. Complete contrast to that is Ikigai, which I have a lovely little book on Ikigai here. And Iki is life and Gai is value or wealth. And it is really about the value and happiness in life. and giving every day a meaning and joy. And it's a lovely little read that and is available online. Put simply, it's the reason you get up in the morning. So I will start my travels. I can't show a lot of slides. I've probably got about 5,000 slides on Japan. But we'll start in Tokyo here and have a little wander around parts of Japan, starting in Tokyo. Tokyo used to be known as Edo in the late 19th century, and is ancient and modern, and has many ancient temples, many of which I have to say have been rebuilt since their destruction in the Second World War, but rebuilt in the beautiful traditional style. As some of you will know, I was born and brought up in some of my life in China, and I lecture on China as well, and the culture and so on, travels. And the style is very much similar to the Chinese style. And these beautiful pagodas that you see in this particular Sensoji temple in Tokyo. And the total contrast to that is the very ultra-modern buildings that you can see. This was taken when I was visiting the Sky Tree here. We went up to the top of the Sky Tree, you'll see. And this is the Ashai building. This is supposed to be a tankard of beer with the froth blowing off the top of it. As an IVF specialist, it looks like a spermatozoa to me, but that's another matter. So this is the Sky Tree, and the view from the top of there is really spectacular. I've got a number of pictures, but you can see so much of Japan, of Tokyo, densely packed city, and one that is fascinating, has so many fascinating different areas. And of course, I usually head for the electronics area because I love my gadgets. So more traditional buildings, I think they're stunningly beautiful myself. And the Toshogu Shrine is a very peaceful place, located not far away. Beautiful trees, beautiful gardens, and these lanterns there. Long walkways with the trees. I'm quite near my hotel where I last stayed, which was this one here. No, the time before last, which this one here was very near these beautiful gardens. So you find these beautiful gardens in the middle of one of the busiest, noisiest cities in the world. And on a Sunday afternoon, you can wander around Ueno Park, which is a huge park, probably about the size of Hyde Park in London. And it itself is very beautiful. It has lots of little nooks and areas, but all the performers come out and they do performances, and people bring their children out and watch the performers. Lots of food, of course, all sorts of delicacies, little fish, you eat them whole, and odd delicacies you see there. Fish and beer, set price. This chap doing balloons for the kids. And this bionic man who stands perfectly still and suddenly moves and scares the children. Absolutely beautiful to wander around there on a Sunday afternoon. Shopping is in the shopping areas is quite crowded, especially at the weekends. Tokyo is crowded everywhere at the best of time, and the shop people are delightful. You can chat to them. Some of them have a smattering of English, but with a bit of sign language, and I've got used to doing this all over the world really, and a bit of sign language and a bit of sort of pidgin English, you can get by. Lovely, beautiful flowers and herbs and things, and interesting, beautifully clean and hygienic food stalls as well. Going beyond Tokyo, you can visit some of the most stunning castles. This is Matsumaya Castle in Matsumaya. Been burnt down several times and rebuilt through the ages. And this is when we visited it with our group in 2019. really very beautiful, beautifully located. And then you have the contrast of this amazing old building with this sort of thing. And you see the same thing in China as well. You see cartoon characters and the most garish things in front of the most stunning buildings. And the Japanese castles are unique, I believe, multi-storied, building up to the sort of living areas up there at the very top. Unfortunately, because they're all built of wood, they tend to catch fire and burn very, very easily. Old temples further out in the countryside. This temple was right in the middle of the countryside in a forest. Several slides of this, but just to give an idea of it. Very beautiful, and this one is old and original. Graveyards are quite, I love graveyards. I have this sort of thing about graveyards, and I love visiting them. Trouble is you can't read the inscriptions on them. This is the very famous, this is probably one of the most photographed buildings in the world, it's called Kinkakuji, the Golden Pavilion known to tourists. I took this picture. I've got, every time I go to Kyoto, I take a picture of the same picture, but I like the composition of this one. In Kobe, an interesting, rather large city, just out of interest, we came to the old British consulate there, and they had the English kings and queens there. And it's now a sort of touristy souvenir type shop run not by the British. But I had to go in and point out to the fact that both of the Union flags flying were upside down. And oh, so sorry, you know. I had to point out the Japanese flag you can fly upside down or whichever way you like, because it's just one red ball and a white background. But the Union flag is, and in hotels in several parts of the world in the past, I've had to go in and tell them that they're flying our flag upside down. So experiencing Japan, you obviously stay in hotels and you have the most modern hotels around, and usually if they can, they have very delightful gardens, traditional gardens with huge numbers of koi carp in the waters there. And strolling through there before breakfast on a work day, before you go off to travel or lecture or whatever, is a real delight, very peaceful. And you have traditional hotels as well, which are very beautiful, lovely to stay with, again, with beautiful gardens as well. This is, I stayed at one of the traditional hotel at hot spring, onsen hot spring, with some colleagues from Japan. I go and lecture there quite often, or have done, and you get up in your yukata. It's not a kimono, it's a yukata, and you go and sit in a hot spring in Kyushu is right down south. There's a lot of hot springs there, all stark naked. And I had to get from my hotel room to there with just a face flannel to cover my embarrassment. They all thought it was roaringly funny. But they're totally untroubled by nudity. Your room, when you first arrive, doesn't have a bed there or any of those things. Television is ubiquitous, I'm afraid. And you just have the plain tatami or rush matting and the paper walls. And then you go off to get changed, you go off to dinner, and you come back and your bed is beautifully made on there. And I usually ask them to give me 2 of these mattresses because it's very hard. And have a better night's sleep. Very good for the back. Breakfast has, as you'll see later, is brought to you in your room there. And Ikebana there, you'll see in a minute, is showing the flower arrangements. Your bath there, and a beautiful garden. Each room had its own little thought garden, which was a real delight. That was way down in Kyushu. One's breakfast is often brought to you in your room. And I was staying with a very well-known scientist, a world-renowned scientist who was in the adjacent room. And that was our breakfast. Very tasty. Unusual to have soup for breakfast, but that's part of it. And in my yukata, enjoying it with my iPad. And Santiago Monet, who, as I say, is an international scientist in IVF, joining me. And then he and I went off to browse around the local town and went to one of these sushi bars and met up with this guy who became very friendly, spoke beautiful English or American English. And we became firm friends and had a delightful meal of raw fish and sushi and sashimi and so on, which I enjoy very much. Dinner time, this is on a separate occasion. This amazing fungus is so expensive, it's put in its own box and you have to buy it. This chap ran the biggest IVF unit in the world, probably. Kato, Osama Kato, who had become a millionaire by doing it. And we had blowfish on that. And this is like a puffer fish, but if you eat the wrong bits, you will die. And people die every year from eating that. And it's a very skilled job for the chefs to get the right bits of the blowfish out. Dining in Japan is delightful. If you're lucky, you'll get a well under the table to put your legs in and a small chair-like thing with a back. And at my age, that makes a big difference. This is Takumi Yanohara and his lovely wife again, and his son, who also runs an IVF unit just south of Yokohama. Occasionally, because one's the VIP, I hate to use the expression, but one is treated as the VIP visitor and lecturer, you get a really smart dinner. You have your own little table, and the ladies who serve you and the boss lady who runs the whole show. And then if you're really lucky, you and the local VIP professor will get your own personal geisha. And this is me looking as if the cat's got the milk with my own geisha, who would look after your every need with food and top up your sake. And then she'd go off and strum with 2 or 3 colleagues who were looking after the other doctors there, to strum on there, play some tunes and do a bit of dancing. Absolutely gorgeous. The geisha are very professional and nothing like what a lot of less informed people think of them. This lady was very interesting in that she was there sitting next to me for much of the evening. And I thought, I can't talk to her in Japanese and she can't talk to me in English. And I discovered she'd spent some years in Paris and spoke fluent French, and I speak passable French. And we spent the evening talking with the geisha in French. And I thought it was one of those out of mind experiences and a very enjoyable experience. Looking now on a bit to the art and culture of Japan, which I have read quite a lot on. First of all, I'm just going to deal briefly with bonsai. This is a beautiful book, a big book on bonsai I've got, was given to me by this. I'll just deal with this first. It's bonsai is planted in a container, started in China, and is related and influenced by Zen Buddhism, over 1,000 years old. And the idea is to create from normal tree stock a miniaturized but realistic representation, as you'll see in a minute. They are not dwarfed plants. They become dwarfed by the way they're treated. And I think it's the most amazing tradition. And this lady here is one of the world experts and wrote this book. This is actually not in Japan. This was in a visit when I was lecturing in Taiwan. I was in Taipei at the time and then went down to Tainan and then back up to Taipei. And her garden was full of the most amazing, this is just a small part of it, bonsai collection. And she, Amy Liang, is considered a world expert on bonsai. And I think you can see that, I'm just going to put that up there, the bonsai in a rock here, and two bonsai there. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. They use lots of old bits of old wood. This is a pine, probably centuries, well, was centuries old, and they're usually put in a room with a background with that, and often with a bit of ikigai or a plant, a flower demonstration nearby. I think these are stunning. This prunus here is probably 400 years old, they reckon. And because its roots are so restricted, it becomes stunted. And what makes this one special is it was in Hiroshima when the atom bomb fell there in 1945. We'll come back to that. And this one is probably 800 years old, this tree. Absolutely stunning. Ikebana, I mentioned, is flower arranging in the Japanese style. I've tried it myself with total failure, but it's good fun and it's very therapeutic. Your mind goes off. I do wood turning now. I produce bowls and all sorts of chunks of wood on my lathe now. But the Japanese art of Ikebana is a traditional art and is all part of Japanese life, Japanese culture. Sumo wrestling, you've all heard of. I don't know if any of you ever watched it. I usually turn it on when I'm sitting in my hotel room in Japan. And of course, it's the national sport. That and baseball are the national sports. And is it's quite short. Often it lasts about 10 seconds or less. And is very traditional in its doing. And some of them earn big salaries, 10 to 30,000 pounds a month, dollars, I mean. And it goes back hundreds of years. I'm not sure thousands, but hundreds of years. And some of these old block prints and paintings show some of the tradition of sumo wrestling. And I just love these Japanese prints. You see the traditional garb, you get an idea of what people wore way back then, what the referee and the judge probably wore in those days. Culture of the samurai, I mentioned Bushido earlier, and I can't go into detail because you could spend 20 minutes talking about this at least, but the 7 virtues are integrity, respect, heroic courage, honor, compassion, honesty and sincerity, and duty and loyalty. And that is the core of Bushido. And as I said earlier, it's very much part of current daily life. The samurai, we've all heard of the samurai, and this book here, which is fascinating reading, that one on the left there, is well worth reading if you're interested. And these lovely chaps in an old picture there, and these people in their costumes here. The expressions on their faces, I think, are spectacular, absolutely wonderful. And the costumes. Now, traditional Japanese art, to me, I find, like Chinese art, I have quite a lot hanging on my walls here, and Japanese prints, which I've picked up in Japan, or been given very often, old prints of Japanese art. And I think it's wonderful, and it's a fascinating story. And most of you will have heard of Hokusai. Hokusai is probably the best known of the Japanese. I have 3 or 4 books on Hokusai because I have a huge admiration and respect for him. And he lived till a great age. And this book is very heavy and has got virtually his complete known works in it, and is well worth seeing if you can borrow it or buy it. Hiroshige was the other Hokusai almost contemporary, and Hokusai and Hiroshige were very famous in their day. And I could talk for an hour on him or them. what was interesting is both of them's work came to have a marked influence, and a lot of people don't know this, on Western European painting, especially towards the end of the 19th century. Manet and Monet all collected and closely studied, particularly Hiroshige's composition. And one of my heroes, Van Gogh, who I've studied and read a lot of books on, had many wood block prints of Hiroshige and Hokusai, and he painted copies of them, which you'll see in a minute. I don't suppose to have that there. With a bit of luck. So this is probably Hokusai's most famous painting, and there are dozens, because these are wood block prints, and they all, but many of them have the picture of Mount Fuji in the background. I'll just go back one more. So many of the pictures have Mount Fuji in the background. And you can see also what a lot of people miss is the fact that there are 3 boats in this. My pointer seems to have disappeared. And there are 3 boats in there, looking a bit terrified, as you would be with these huge waves. Mount Fuji is the iconic image of Japan and has a real place in Japanese art. I visited Miyanoshita, which is where I think my family, well, I know they honeymooned there, and the closest I could get, oh dear, my pointer has disappeared completely. The closest I could get was the to that, right in the middle, you'll see a tiny snow-capped peak at the top there. I'd seen it several times from the train, whizzing by, but I tried to get a full picture of it. A lot of Hokusai's pictures feature Mount Fuji, as so many Japanese prints and paintings do. These are mostly woodblock prints, and I think they are stunning, and they show so much of the life and people and times of Hokusai. You can see their costumes, their boats, the architecture, the bridges, the way people live. That chap emptying out his soil or washing up water or whatever, because they lived in boats like that, whole families, traveling with your luggage on your shoulder boards, admiring Mount Fuji in the distance. But look at the costumes that they're wearing, and those were their daily costumes. And we're talking about the 18th and 19th century when these were done, traveling through the countryside. Castle on the right, and the boats drifting down the lake. And flowers, they loved doing flowers. They painted huge numbers of flowers because they are so adaptable, so amenable to beautiful paintings like these. This is a portrait of an old man, around about 1840. Reminds me a bit like one of my other heroes, Leonardo da Vinci, who I've got several books on. He did some of these grotesque pictures in his drawings, sketches. An Old Man by Hokusai. The simplicity of that, I think, is astonishing. And this is probably a self-portrait of Hokusai with some story on the side. As I said earlier, what a lot of people don't realize is how much particularly Hokusai and Hiroshige influenced people, and in particular, Vincent van Gogh. And he had a large collection of Japanese woodblock prints, which influenced his painting very considerably, particularly in his later years, as his collection and his admiration for Japanese art grew. Sorry, I've gone too far. Oh dear, gone too far. I'll come back to those in a minute. This is a quote from Van Gogh to his brother Theo. they died very close together within a couple of months of each other. Very sad. Theo, as some of you will know, was an art dealer and dealt with a lot of Vincent's art. And we wouldn't be able to study Japanese art, it seems to me, without becoming much happier and more cheerful. And it makes us return to nature, despite our education and our work in a world of convention. And I feel the same when I look at some of these, particularly the natural paintings of scenery and people and flowers. Now this is Père Tanguy, the very famous portrait of Père Tanguy by Van Gogh. And you can see in the background there are several Japanese woodblock prints, nearly all by Hokusai or Hiroshige. And he collected those. And this self-portrait with his bandaged ear in 1889 shows another Japanese print with Mount Fuji in the background of there as well. So that's one of his own reproductions of one by Hiroshige. This is one by another Japanese artist on the right, and Van Gogh's interpretation of it on the left there. Quite a lot bolder than the more gentle Japanese version there. And Hokusai's did a lot of plum blossom and other blossoms with the moon. Famous picture, this one. And then Van Gogh's almond blossom as well, which I think is very beautiful. I'm going to try and just, it won't come. It's thought that this famous Starry, Starry Night picture by Van Gogh, it was influenced also by Hokusai's wave, very famous wave. That is one of the most famous pictures in the world of Hokusai's, and also that is one of the most famous of Van Gogh's paintings. Hokusai's lilies and Van Gogh's lilies. Hiroshige's picture on the left and Van Gogh's on the right with the imitated Japanese calligraphy. Again, Hiroshige on the left, Van Gogh on the right. You can see he was really taken with this, and this is probably Hiroshige painting. More recently, artists have stuck, some of them have stuck to the traditional art form, that is the pavilion that you saw earlier on the left, and the tower, the pagoda that you saw earlier on the left, and a street scene. They're all painted in the traditional form. More recently, I have more of a struggle coming to terms with some of the modern Japanese art, but if you go online, you'll see amazing examples of the modern recent Japanese art. When on my travels, when we went to Matsuyama, we went to a beautiful art exhibition, which I've a lot of pictures from, but sat in the middle of nowhere with this huge pumpkin. You can see the size of it there, which is a very famous piece of modern art at Matsuyama. Manga and anime are art forms which are very, very popular. These are little comic books, really. You can see in the library there, in the bookshop, top left, the manga shops are very common, and they are very, very popular. And they range from comic strips to horror comics to all sorts of different types. Now, Japanese calligraphy is, to me, a really, my pointer has come back again. I'm going to move that over there. Japanese calligraphy is a really interesting, and Chinese, because I studied Chinese calligraphy when I was a kid at school in Peking. It is an artistic form of expression, very stylized, and there are different types of it in Japan. Zen, it's a relaxation, it's like painting, harmony and wisdom, beauty and balance, sweeping, flowing. Watching someone do calligraphy, which is fascinating, is really, really interesting. And it acts as a meditative and spiritual offering. And it's like flower arranging and Ikebana and Ikigai. And the tea ceremony, which I've not put in here, I should have done so. I've attended so many different tea ceremonies. They're all absolutely delightful. There are three main types of Japanese calligraphy, all done with a brush, as most of you will realize. And Shodo is one of the most traditional ones. And Shodo is the oldest and most profound of them. Got a long history. There are very different techniques being accompanied. And Shodo is a Japanese word translated to describe as the way of artistic handwriting or beautiful writing. And I think that rather beautifully described. I've got some of these hanging on my walls here. My wife's very tolerant about my love of Oriental art and culture, as she is of my Nelson stuff, which some of you will have heard me talk on. So Shodo is sort of original one. Then there's Kaisho, or square style, which is a much more precise style, less fluid, as it were. And each stroke is carefully and expertly executed. And proportions are very important. Then there's Gyosho, which is the sort of moving style. And this is, I find, much more difficult to interpret, well, not that I can read it anyway, is an entirely different look to it. And Tosho is what looks to me like a form of Japanese shorthand to me, but that goes back a long, long way as well. And in the museums and art galleries, you'll see examples. And this museum, which those of you who've been to Tokyo will probably have visited, is a remarkable place. It really is fascinating. I think I've been there 3 or 4 times now, and they change their displays quite often, so it's nice. I'm just going to show a few items from there because it does show the depth and breadth of Japanese culture and art. The sword, of course, is famous in Japan. This sword here, you would have thought it was minted in an expert factory somewhere. This was made in 1393. 1393, and that is steel of the highest quality and temper. This is 11th, 12th century, even earlier. Steel there, it's forged and folded over and forged and folded over and beaten and folded over so many times. I've watched it, a video of it being done. Battle armor is fascinating. This is not that old, 18th, 19th century styles. I think worn more for ornament than anything else, but they are fascinating and totally unique. That nowhere else in the world has anything like it. Some of you will have heard of Netsuke and Inro. Netsuke is the toggle here that holds the Inro in place. Both very collectible. My predecessor, Mr. Patrick Steptoe, who created Louise Brown, who I took over from when he died, he used to collect Netsuke, had a lovely collection of Netsuke. And these inros used to contain little odds and bobs. Nowadays, we'd keep our car parking ticket in it, or our change, or cigarettes or something. Some of them are exquisite, as you'll see. There was a large section of Netsuke in the museum, and just a few pictures here. These are really quite tiny. They're only about this big usually, an inch or 2 inches big. And exquisitely carved, some in wood, some in ivory, some in bone. And the inro, these are inro here, are usually made of wood and folded over. The enamel and gold China, I was going to say China, it's or pottery, it's beautiful. Some of it is the most ornamental. This is around about 1890 odd, so not that old, but so beautifully and elaborately done. Bronze casting, I love bronzes. The bronze in sections in museums in China, all the different museums and cities I've been to, I go straight to the bronzes. And I've got 300 or 400 pictures of bronzes, but these are Japanese bronzes, and they imported from China the technique, and they've evolved it so you can get the intricacy. I mean, the intricacy of this is just remarkable. And that's a fable goblin hunting scene. These are from China, and these are remarkable casts. This is a ding here, and a bell, and a vase. But these were cast and made 2,500 to 1,000 BC, so 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, which I find absolutely astonishing. Another Chinese jar. These are from these are in the Tokyo Museum, but come from China originally. Antique Japanese art prints, I think, are amazing. I told you I just love them. And some of them tell fable. This is a folk tale, the tale of the bamboo cutter. I don't know where the bamboo cutter is, but it's fascinating to see them. They're on top of the roof, the thatched roof, and the different dresses and costumes of all the different people up there, and the expressions on their faces are just unique. Beautiful, beautiful kimonos, a beauty with a paper lantern and fan, probably around about 1700s somewhere. Sorry, 18th century. And these are actors' costumes. I love the expressions on their faces too. The series of prints from different actors, and these are kabuki actors. Kabuki is the sort of acting, a particular stylized type of acting. Okay, this is a very large Japanese screen with people doing different things, the men in their kimonos and the women in their beautiful, beautiful kimonos, different screens. These are large screens, which I took pictures of. And woodblock prints of women in kimonos there with the servant lady and the lady of the house there. I mean, that is exquisite in my mind. And the kimonos themselves, these are worth an absolute fortune, all silk and hand embroidered in silk. Exquisite, they really are exquisite. Just a bit more detail to show up close some of the detail there. These are all taken, I took these in the Tokyo Museum. Traveling a bit further afield, I'd always wanted to visit Hiroshima because I always felt it was a duty to go there almost. And with Jon Baines' tour, the Jon Baines tour I led in 2019, I had the first opportunity to go there. And it was one of the most deeply moving experiences of my life to go there. And I took a load of pictures, of course, but these are fragments of chunks of metal from after the bomb blast, just everything melted in the heat of it. And there's a big gallery there of pictures from the aftermath of the bomb blast. Hiroshima was virtually flattened, but this was one of the few remaining buildings there which you saw in the present day, because it's been left as it was, as a memorial, and I think quite rightly. What I thought was very emotional, rather nice combined view with the flowers and the devastation of this building. And on the right there, shows the epicenter of the bomb blast. The bomb exploded several hundred feet above Hiroshima, not on the ground. And one of the most moving things is to see all these children, very young kindergarten children, coming to visit Hiroshima, the best behaved children you will ever see in the world, except maybe China. But I think the Japanese are even better. And they're all chattering away, like sparrows twittering away in the trees. Absolutely lovely to hear them all. And here paying their respects in their different school hats. You can see they've all got different school hats, paying their respects in this memorial here and leaving flowers in the memory of that occasion. Very, very moving. In Kobe, there was a remarkable museum I took, being an enthusiastic woodworker. This traditional woodworking museum, I thought when I took our people there in 2019, that no one's going to be interested, but everyone, women, men, everyone were fascinated by this and the tradition and the old masters like this fellow here. And the way they built huge structures without a single screw, nut, bolt, or glue, and that would all interlock like a 3D jigsaw. And the museum, the tools they used to use, adzes and such, and this was the workman's toolbox. I suppose it was a ceremonial one, and models of temples built in the craft shop. I thought it was an absolutely fascinating 2 or 3 hours there. This is the Torii Shrine in Central Island, the inland sea, which we visited. A fascinating place and lots to see there, and a large temple and pagoda and so on there, and a painting there of it. So finally, let me just come full circle to visit the probable place of my conception. I'm being a bit personal and sentimental here, but I had a day off before I met up with the group in 2019 in Tokyo, and I arranged to go, or I went down to Miyanoshita, which my mother said was where she spent a large part of their honeymoon. And I caught the Romance Car Express from Tokyo to Miyanoshita, which was a very unique train, bullet type train, but not a true bullet train. Very smart looking, immaculately clean. I called the Romance Car because it's the honeymoon destination, one of the honeymoon destinations so honeymooning couples would go down there, bomb down there in Romance Car. It was about an hour's trip. And this is the hotel where my parents stayed. And I had hoped that I would be able to go in there and visit it, and because I've got a book that they bought in the hotel, which is about the history of the hotel, which I was going to show to the manager. And my taxi got there and it was shut. So I was bitterly disappointed not to be able to see that. It was being refurbished in time for the Olympics. So my lasting thoughts about Japan, the uniqueness of Japan, in my opinion, go back to what I said in the beginning. And I think maybe having seen some of the pictures and heard of some of what I've said, I just repeat, there are few people, I believe, in the modern world are not affected in some way by the ideas, culture, and economy of Japan. And you saw that in the art of Van Gogh and Monet and Manet and so on. Yet the country remained an enigma, and it truly is. To me, the people are absolutely delightful, unfailingly polite, almost embarrassingly so, because everyone bows at you and you bow back and they bow back again, and so it goes on. They are a bit of an unsolved riddle because a lot of people don't understand them, and on first viewing don't quite take to the culture because they've adapted to some Western ideas but stick firmly to their unique culture, a lot of their unique cultures, religious, art, and so on. And tradition and modernity are all part of it together. And for me, it's the people, the art and the culture and their traditions that make Japan the unique country it is. And if you've not been to Japan, I do urge you to go. It is unlike any other, I've traveled extensively around the world in my lifetime. 81 years, I've covered a lot of countries, but Japan to me is unique and fascinating, and I would urge you to go there. This is from my last trip. This was left with me when each one of us got one of these from our guide, which says Ichigo Ichie, which means one time, one encounter, and is intended, one go, one encounter, intended to say, treasure every meeting, for it will never occur again. And this was from Kyoko, our guide. And Kyoko means a happy child for generations. And she was the most delightful person, Kyoko, or Coco as we used to call her. She was a fount of knowledge and a brilliant guide, and buzzing around, so active, she'd be darting around the place all the time. Oh, don't go there, go here, and blah, blah, toilets over there, and oh. And Coco was brilliant. So I leave you with her. Just Emma said, perhaps I could just mention, Jon Baines is doing some more tours to Japan. They've got a super sounding one. I wish I was going on this. I used to be a fellow of the Royal Society of Medicine, but I gave it up when I moved down to the boondocks in Tavistock, Devon. Janice Liversedge is a lovely person, very knowledgeable, and used to more or less run the Royal Society of Medicine. And she's taking a group there soon. There's another group being led by Philip Dowell in the end of the year. This is a dental study tour. I did an obstetrics and gynecology one. Jon Baines specializes, as some of you will know, in tours for different groups, or mainly medical, scientific, dental, and so on, nursing, all groups. And then the last one here is this chap, Jason James, who I met only briefly once, is probably the most knowledgeable person about Japan. I believe he speaks fluent Japanese. He's lived there, and he is now chairman of some Anglo-Japanese society, based in London now. But he knows more about Japan than almost anyone else I know. So, arigato gozaimasu. Thank you for listening. I hope I've stimulated your interest in this fascinating country, fascinating art, fascinating people, fascinating culture. Thank you very much. I'm happy if Emma will allow you to speak, to answer any questions. If you need to peel off and cook supper, which I've got to do in a minute, happy, but I'm happy to answer questions for as long as you like. Thank you very much.